The geological anomaly alarm ripped through the silence of Melis Base like a scream in the vacuum. Dr. Sarah Chen dropped her mug of synthetic coffee, the brown liquid floating in perfect droplets in the research module's reduced gravity, and rushed to the seismic sensing station. 3 years, 3 long years, cataloging Martian rocks and frozen soil samples. 3 years waiting for something, anything, that would justify the billions spent to keep 7 scientists 225 million kilometers from home. And now, at 4 in the morning base time, the ground-penetrating radar finally had something to say. Commander John Miller was already in the control room when Sarah arrived, his blue eyes fixed on the holographic screens that floated in the thin air. The Space Force veteran had served in lunar orbit, on the International Space Station, and on 2 asteroid missions, but Sarah could see something different in his expression now. It wasn't fear, it was awe. Mars isn't dead, Sarah thought, observing the data, just waiting. The seismic readings showed a perfect geometric structure 47 meters below the surface of Melas Chasma, the deepest cut in the planet's equatorial valley system. The anomaly was 7 meters on each side, forming an almost perfect cube. The material's density was impossible, fluctuating between values that suggested heavy metal, advanced ceramics, and something completely outside terrestrial norms. But that wasn't what made Sarah's heart race. It was the thermal signature. The structure was 3 degrees Celsius, warmer than the surrounding soil. On a planet where the average temperature hovered around 70 degrees below zero, that was like finding a lit bonfire at Earth's South Pole. Dr. Dmitry Volkov stumbled into the control room, still adjusting his thermal suit. The Russian astrogeologist was the team's most experienced member, having participated in the first crewed expedition to Mars 15 years earlier. His grey hair was disheveled, and he smelled of water recycler disinfectant, but his brown eyes shone with the intensity Sarah had learned to recognize as pure scientific curiosity. Dmitry studied the data for exactly 17 seconds before uttering a Russian expletive that needed no translation. Miller crossed his arms over his broad chest, his military posture perfect even in Martian gravity. 3 years as commander of Melis Base had taught him that great discoveries came with great responsibilities. "We need to notify Houston," was his first thought. The second was more pragmatic, but the communication delay is 22 minutes. If this is what I think it is, we can't wait 44 minutes for a response. Chief Engineer Maria Santos arrived running, her dark skin still marked by her dorm pillow. The British woman from London was the youngest member of the team, but her genius with mechanical systems had made her indispensable. She carried a tablet and was already running excavation simulations before even asking what was happening. The other 3 team members joined them in the following minutes. Dr. James Park, a microbiologist specializing in extremophile life, came with his portable sampling kit. Dr. Amara Okafor, a planetary chemistry specialist, brought her augmented reality glasses already calibrated for spectroscopic analysis. And systems technician Wei Zhang dragged a cart with emergency communication equipment, always prepared for the worst-case scenario. The team gathered around the central holographic table. 7 people from 6 different countries, united by a purpose that transcended nationalities, to discover if humanity was truly alone in the universe. Sarah activated the 3-dimensional model of the anomaly. The structure rotated in the air, its perfect edges reflecting the projected light. There was no erosion, no sign of degradation, despite being buried in Martian sediment that instruments dated back 3 billion years. Maria was the first to break the growing silence. She spoke in English, but her British accent carried the weight of the question everyone was thinking. This is artificial, isn't it? Dmitri adjusted his glasses, zooming in on the spectral signature interface. The material reflects electromagnetic radiation selectively. It absorbs in the infrared range, emits in the visible spectrum. It's as if it's breathing energy. James leaned over the table, his black eyes wide. Breathing is a biological term. Are you saying this is alive? The Russian geologist shook his head slowly. I'm saying, I don't know what I'm saying, but whatever it is, it's active. And it has been active for a very, very long time. Miller made the decision that would define the rest of their lives. We're going to excavate. Maria, how long do you need to prepare the autonomous drill? The engineer was already doing mental calculations. 8 hours to calibrate the seismic sensors and program the drilling route, plus 4 for transport to the site. The drilling itself at this depth, and considering we don't know the material's actual hardness, could take 20 to 30 hours. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. Less than 2 days. In less than 2 days, they would touch something that could rewrite all human knowledge about the solar system. Amara raised her hand, hesitantly. Shouldn't we wait for authorization from Earth? Direct contamination protocol requires approval from the Planetary Security Council. The commander looked at each team member, gauging their expressions. The decision wasn't just his, it never had been. They were 7 equal votes when it came to science. I'll put it on the table, Miller said, his voice firm but not authoritarian. The next ideal communication window with Earth is in 19 hours. If we send the request now, it will take 22 minutes to arrive, plus time for analysis and debate, plus 22 minutes for the response to return. In the best-case scenario, we'll wait 2 days. In the worst, a week if there's political bureaucracy. He paused, letting the words sink in. Or we start the excavation in the next few hours. And by the time Houston receives our data, we'll already have real information to work with. Open vote. Who is in favor of waiting? Amara raised her hand. Alone. Sarah respected the chemist's caution, but curiosity was winning. Who is in favor of starting the excavation immediately? 6 hands rose in the thin Martian air. The decision was made. Over the next 12 hours, Melas Base transformed into a hive of frantic activity. Maria led the preparation of the autonomous drill, a colossus of titanium and carbon nanotubes capable of cutting volcanic rock like butter. Wei configured a network of remote sensors around the excavation site, creating a monitoring mesh that would transmit real-time data. Sarah and Dmitri reviewed every centimeter of the region's geological maps, looking for patterns that might indicate other similar structures. James prepared sterilization protocols in case the anomaly contained organic matter, while Amara calibrated the mass spectrometers to identify unknown elements. Miller supervised everything with the efficiency of a maestro conducting a symphony. He also drafted the message to Earth, choosing each word carefully. It wasn't just a scientific report, it was potentially the most important announcement in human history. When the transport rover set off towards the excavation point, carrying the drill and all the equipment, the 7 remained in the control room, watching the real-time cameras. The Martian sun was beginning to rise on the distant horizon, tinting the sky a dusty pink that never failed to impress Sarah. The drill positioned itself over the exact coordinates. Its stabilizers dug into the Martian soil. The synthetic diamond drill bit began to spin, raising a cloud of red dust that danced in the thin atmosphere. 47 meters seemed so little in planetary terms, but every drilled centimeter was a step into the unknown. 20 hours later, exhausted but unable to sleep, they watched the drill break through the last layer of sediment and touch something solid. The sound transmitted by the seismic sensors was crystalline, like metal touching glass. It wasn't the sound of rock. It was the sound of something manufactured, designed, intentional. Sarah felt her heart race as she watched the data flow across the screens. The material's density was impossible, fluctuating between values that suggested advanced metal alloy and crystalline ceramic. The structure's temperature had increased by 2 degrees since drilling began, as if it were responding to the touch, awakening from an ancient slumber. The drill automatically retracted, and the robotic arm, equipped with high-resolution cameras and sensors, descended into the opening. The control room screens lit up with the image of what lay below, and for a moment, no one breathed. The cube was smooth as a mirror, reflecting the rover's LED lights in patterns that seemed to move, flow like frozen water. The surface had no joints, no seams, no sign of assembly. It was as if it had been molded from a single piece of impossible material. But it wasn't the surface that held Sarah's attention. It was the symbols. Engraved on the cube's upper face, glowing with a soft blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat, were characters that were definitely not human. Intertwined lines, geometric spirals, fractal patterns that repeated on progressively smaller scales. And at the center of it all, a symbol larger than the others, a perfect circle crossed by 7 radial lines. 7. Like the number of team members, like Earth's 7 continents, like the 7 notes of the musical scale, like the 7 days it took to change everything. James whispered what everyone was thinking. Someone left us a message. Sarah Chen didn't blink. For 3 full minutes, her eyes fixed on the alien symbols glowing on the screen. Her training as a xenoarchaeologist had prepared her for this moment theoretically, but theory and reality were completely different universes. She was looking at the first concrete evidence of non-human intelligence, and her scientific mind was caught between ecstasy and paralysis. Wei Zhang was the first to recover from the shock. The systems technician had a peculiar ability to transform awe into practical action. He was already isolating the light frequencies emitted by the symbols, building a complete spectroscopic profile. The light isn't just a reflection of our LEDs, he announced, his voice charged with controlled excitement. The symbols are actively generating photons. It's like pixels on a screen, but the technology is so advanced that I can't identify the power source. Miller approached the communications console. The protocol was clear. Any discovery of possible extraterrestrial life or intelligence should be reported immediately to Earth. He began to draft the message, but his hands trembled imperceptibly over the holographic keyboard. How do you summarize something that changes everything in a text report? Dmitry Volkov had other plans. The Russian geologist pulled up a chair and sat in front of the holographic table, enlarging the symbols until they filled the entire projection space. He had been studying patterns for 40 years. from fractals in ice crystals to dune formations on Titan. If there was a visual language there, he would find it. The symbols are not random, he murmured, more to himself than to the others. Look here. These spirals follow the Fibonacci sequence, and these angles, all multiples of 37.5 degrees. It's pure mathematics. Amara Okafor adjusted her augmented reality glasses and overlaid chemical analyses onto the symbols. The cube's material composition is also fascinating. I've detected traces of elements that shouldn't be stable, isotopes with microsecond half-lives, yet somehow they remain cohesive. It's as if someone has rewritten the rules of nuclear physics. Maria Santos, always the most pragmatic of the group, raised the question everyone avoided asking. What if it's not a welcome message? What if it's a warning, like, don't open, deadly danger? James Park shook his head, his fingers dancing over a tablet as he compared the patterns with databases of terrestrial languages. Warnings are usually simple and universal. Skulls, radiation symbols, red colors. This is too complex. It's dense information, not a stop sign. Sarah finally tore her eyes from the screen and looked at her colleagues. 6 brilliant minds. 7, if you included the commander, each processing the discovery through their own specialties. And suddenly, like a flash of insight, she understood. 7, Sarah said aloud, making everyone stop. The central symbol has 7 radial lines. There are 7 people on this base. Dimitri, you said the angles are multiples of 37.5 degrees, right? 37.5 times 7 is? Wei didn't need a calculator. 262.5 degrees. Almost a full circle. Almost, Sarah repeated, feeling the excitement grow, leaving a space to complete. It's an invitation, not a ready-made message, but an interactive puzzle. Miller stopped typing and turned to the scientist. Are you suggesting we need to do something? Interact with the cube? Sarah nodded vigorously. Think about it. Whoever built that knew that a species advanced enough to find it would be curious. Curiosity isn't just human. It's a characteristic of any intelligence that seeks to expand knowledge. The cube is testing us. Dimitri stood up so fast, he floated a few centimeters in the low gravity. Genius. It's like the Voyager golden records. We humans put encoded information, hoping an alien intelligence could decipher it. This is the reverse. They left a test, hoping we would be intelligent enough to solve it. Maria was already drawing up plans. I can modify the robotic arm to physically interact with the surface. If we need to touch specific sequences or apply pressure at certain points, I can do that remotely. James raised a hand in a gesture of caution. What if we activate something dangerous? Explosion? Radiation release? Structural collapse? That's why we use the rover, Miller replied, his military mind already calculating risks. We're 5 kilometers away. Even if the structure releases energy equivalent to a bomb, we'll be protected by the distance and the canyon between us and the site. Amara frowned. What if it's something beyond physical? A digital virus? A transmission that affects our systems? We tapped the console confidently. All rover systems are isolated. No direct connection to the base except the radio link, and I can cut that in milliseconds if I detect any anomaly. Sarah looked at each team member. They were scared, yes, but also completely alive, energized by the possibility of making history. This was what separated them from machines. Informed courage, the ability to weigh risks and choose to move forward even without guarantees. "Commander," she said formally, "I request permission to develop an interaction protocol with the anomaly." Miller took a deep breath. He thought of his 9-year-old daughter on Earth who drew rockets and dreamed of stepping on Mars one day. He thought of all the generations of human explorers who looked into the unknown and chose to take one more step. He thought of Columbus, Armstrong, all who risked everything for discovery. "Permission granted," he said, "but we do this the right way. Sarah and Dimitri, you lead the analysis of the symbols. Maria and Wei, prepare the rover for controlled interaction. James and Amara, you are our safety net. Monitor every chemical, biological, or energetic anomaly. At the first sign of real danger, we abort." He paused, looking each one in the eyes. "And I'm sending the report to Earth now. If something goes wrong, at least Houston will know what we tried to do. If something goes right, they'll need to start preparing the world for what this means." Miller typed the message with deliberate care. Each word was chosen to convey urgency without causing panic, extraordinariness without sounding delusional. "Melas Base to Mission Control. Houston. We confirm the discovery of an artifact of potentially non-human origin. Structure demonstrates impossible geometry and physical properties that defy current models. Initiating controlled interaction protocol, as per first contact guidelines. Requesting consultation with astrophysics, exobiology, and security teams. Continuous updates to follow. Miller, Commander Melas Base, end transmission. 22 minutes until the message reached Earth. Another 22 for any response to return. 44 minutes of total isolation, making decisions that would affect the entire human species. The next 6 hours were a marathon of analysis and preparation. Sarah and Dimitri broke the symbols into smaller components, identifying repetitive patterns and mathematical sequences. They discovered that the symbols formed 3 layers of information: geometric, numerical, and what appeared to be musical notation based on harmonics. The elegance of the design was astonishing. Whoever created it understood that mathematics and music were universal languages, bridges between minds that had never shared a cultural context. Maria modified the rover's robotic arm, adding high-precision tactile sensors and a sound frequency emitter. If the cube responded to light, perhaps it would also respond to vibration. We created a complete suite of diagnostic tools, including an emergency shutdown system that would cut all power to the rover if it detected unauthorized behavior in the systems. When they were finally ready, the Martian sun had already crossed half the sky. Melas Base was in absolute silence, only the soft hum of the air recyclers and the occasional creak of the structure adjusting to temperature. Sarah was at the main controls, her hands hovering over the holographic interface. The plan was simple. The robotic arm would touch the cube's central symbol, the circle with 7 lines, applying pressure in a sequence corresponding to the prime numbers from 1 to 7. "Ready when you are," Miller said behind her, his voice firm but encouraging. Sarah took a deep breath and activated the sequence. Through the rover's cameras, they watched the robotic arm descend into the excavation, approaching the glowing cube. The contact effector, a synthetic sapphire tip, gently touched the central symbol. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, like a wave spreading in a lake, blue light radiated from the point of contact, running across all the symbols on the surface. The glow intensified, transforming the excavation pit into a well of celestial light. And then, something impossible happened. The cube began to unfold, geometrically perfect faces separated like petals of a mechanical flower, revealing inner layers that glowed with constellations of luminous points. And at the center of it all, suspended in the air, without any visible support, a spherical object the size of a basketball, pulsed with rhythmic light. The sphere spoke, not in words, but in a direct radio transmission that made all base systems beep simultaneously. Way almost fell out of his chair, trying to capture the frequency. Sarah looked at the screen, her eyes wide, and whispered the translation her scientific mind was already processing. It's a greeting. It's saying, "Welcome to the Ascension Repository." The voice emanating from the sphere wasn't exactly a voice. It was a perfect synthesis of frequencies that the human brain interpreted as communication, completely bypassing the language barrier. Sarah felt the words not in her ears, but directly in her mind, as if they were her own thoughts translated from something much greater. Species catalogued: Homo sapiens. Planetary origin: third rocky body of the local G2V star system. Development status: pre-interstellar, primitive orbital expansion phase. Preliminary assessment: approved for ascension test. The words echoed in the control room like silent thunder. Sarah felt her knees buckle. Approved for test. The AI wasn't asking if they wanted to try. It was declaring that they had already demonstrated minimum competence just by finding and activating the repository. It was simultaneously validating and terrifying. Wei Jiang was transcribing frantically, his fingers flying over the keyboard as recording systems captured every nuance of the transmission. His engineer's mind was already processing the implications. If the AI could communicate directly through modulated radio waves, what other capabilities did it possess? What other technologies were beyond current human comprehension? Amara monitored radiation levels, which remained completely normal. There was no X-ray emission, no dangerous microwave pulse, no energy signature that could harm biological tissue. The communication was perfectly safe, carefully designed not to cause harm. It was a small but significant detail. Whoever built this technology cared about organic life. James checked biological sensors connected to each team member's suits, looking for any adverse effects on human physiology. Elevated heart rate in everyone, but that was expected given the situation. No sign of harmful radiation, no abnormal immune response, no neurological interference. The voice they heard in their minds was pure communication, without manipulation. Nothing. The communication was perfectly safe. Miller approached the main console, his posture erect and commanding. "This is Commander John Miller of Miller Space, representing the Unified Earth Space Agency. We have identified this structure as an artifact of non-human origin. We request clarification on its purpose and intentions." There was a pause. The sphere pulsed in a pattern Sarah recognized as data processing. Then, the answer came, and with it, a revelation that would change everything. Recognition of local authority accepted. "Commander Miller, your species has reached the first development threshold required for access to the Galactic Consortium. This repository was established 3.2 billion Earth years ago by the Architects, a coalition of advanced civilizations dedicated to identifying and guiding emerging species. 57 repositories were distributed in this galactic sector. You are the 12th species to activate one." The silence in the control room was absolute. 12th. They were not alone. They had never been alone. Dmitri was the first to ask the obvious question. Where are the other 11 species? Why haven't they contacted us? The sphere rotated gently, and holograms materialized in the air around it, projected directly through the rover's cameras onto the base screens. Images of alien worlds, impossible architectures, life forms that defied all terrestrial biological classification. Of the 11 previous species that activated repositories in this sector, 6 completed the Ascension test and now actively participate in the Galactic Consortium. 3 failed the test, but chose to continue isolated development, being monitored for future reassessment. 2 failed catastrophically and were discontinued. Maria felt a shiver run down her spine. Discontinued. The word had a terrifying weight, even coming from an ancient artificial intelligence. What exactly does discontinued mean? The transmission continued without apparent emotion. Species that demonstrate irreversible self-destructive patterns or systematic destructive behavior towards other life forms are prevented from advancing beyond their native systems, not through aggression, but through technological containment. Their developments in interstellar travel are neutralized until they demonstrate sufficient maturity or naturally become extinct. Sarah felt the weight of human history pressing against her consciousness. World wars, nuclear weapons, climate change, mass extinctions caused by human activity. They could easily fit into their category of problematic species. But Miller, a veteran of minor space conflicts and tense diplomatic negotiations, maintained his composure. What is the nature of this Ascension test? The test evaluates 3 fundamental characteristics necessary for peaceful coexistence in the Galactic Consortium. The sphere glowed more intensely. First, capacity for inter-individual cooperation towards goals that transcend immediate personal benefit. Second, ability to process complex and uncertain information to make ethical decisions under pressure. Third, psychological resilience in the face of cosmic vastness and relative insignificance. James let out a nervous laugh. So basically, teamwork, wisdom, and not going crazy when you realize the universe is too big to care about us individually? Imprecise, but conceptually adequate simplification, the AI replied, and Sarah would have sworn she detected a tone of approval in the transmission. Amara looked at Miller with evident concern. Commander, we don't have authorization from Earth to accept tests that could affect all humanity. This is diplomacy on a planetary level. Miller was already thinking about it. The message he had sent to Houston would take 22 minutes to arrive. The response, another 22. Any decision from Earth would take hours, possibly days, if it involved the United Nations. And the sphere was here now, offering something humanity had sought since the first human looked at the stars. He made the decision that would define his career and possibly his place in history. Repository entity, before we proceed, I need to know, is there a time limit for this test? Can we consult our home civilization before accepting? Consultation permitted. You have until this planet's next solar cycle to decide, approximately 24.6 Earth hours. After this period, the repository will enter dormancy again for a 50 Earth-year evaluation cycle. Way quickly did the calculations. 24 hours. Enough time for full communication with Earth, but tight enough to force a quick decision. Sarah observed the holograms of alien civilizations floating in the air. One showed creatures that looked like living crystals, their geometric structures pulsing with internal light. Another displayed aquatic beings with multiple tentacles that manipulated tools with surgical precision. A third presented a gaseous species, conscious clouds that inhabited the atmosphere of a gas giant. And all of them had passed. All had proven they deserved a place among the stars. Maria broke the silence with a practical question. If we accept the test and fail, what happens to us? To Earth, failure in the test does not result in punishment, the AI clarified. You would simply continue your natural development with the option to try again when you reach new civilizational milestones. The technological containment mentioned earlier is only applied to species that demonstrate active destructive patterns during the test, not to failures due to incompetence or inexperience. Dmitri stood up, his joints cracking in the low gravity. He walked to the panoramic window of the control room, looking at the Martian landscape outside. Melas Chasma stretched for kilometers, an ancient wound on the face of the planet that might once have flowed with water. Mars had been alive, and it had died. Earth still lived, but it was fragile. "Commander," the geologist said without taking his eyes off the window, "my unofficial opinion is that we don't have the luxury of refusing. If there really is a galactic consortium out there, knowledge of it will change everything. Economy, politics, philosophy, religion, everything. If we don't bring this information, it will be another nation that eventually mounts a mission to Mars. And at that moment, we will be 50 years behind." Miller valued the opinion of each member. "Sarah, your assessment?" The xenoarchaeologist turned to the commander. "I have spent my life studying the possibility of alien life. Theories, probabilities, equations. And now it's here. Real, tangible, offering humanity the chance to join something greater. My vote is to accept the test." One by one, each team member expressed their position. James was next, nervously adjusting his glasses. "I've spent my career studying organisms that survive in environments that should be impossible for life. Bacteria in volcanic geysers, archaea in Antarctic ice. They persist because they evolved to adapt. If there's one thing humans know how to do, it's adapt. My vote is yes." We nodded enthusiastically. "I've been working with systems since I was 8 years old. Programming, hardware, networks. And I learned one thing. Closed systems eventually fail. They become obsolete, break under their own limitations. Earth is a closed system, finite resources, limited space. If we want humanity to survive long-term, we need to become an open system. Connecting with other civilizations is not just an opportunity, it's an evolutionary necessity. Yes, definitely yes." Amara took a deep breath, her fingers drumming on the console. "I'm a scientist because I believe in evidence, and the evidence here is clear. This AI has existed for billions of years without harming us. It could have destroyed us when we opened the repository. It could have manipulated us, but it didn't. It offered choice, transparency, respect. If the Galactic Consortium operates with these same principles, then we are fools to refuse. My vote is to accept, but with continuous vigilance." Maria stood up, floating lightly in the reduced gravity, and looked at each colleague before speaking. "I grew up in a working-class district where people said girls like me had no future in science. I proved them wrong. I came to Mars because I believed we could go further, be more. Now we have the chance to prove that not just to ourselves, but to the entire universe. We didn't travel 225 million kilometers to be afraid. Now, my vote is yes, with all my heart. Miller observed his team, 7 extraordinary individuals who had become an impromptu family in Martian isolation. Each had brought their own stories, their own reasons for coming to Mars, and now, together, they would make the most important decision in human history. He took a deep breath. He thought of all the astronauts who came before him, all who risked everything for discovery. He thought of Yuri Gagarin saying, "Poyakali," as the first human spacecraft launched him into the unknown. He thought of Neil Armstrong stepping on the moon without absolute guarantee of return. He thought of Sally Ride, Valentina Tereshkova, Liu Yang, all who broke barriers to reach the stars. And he thought of his daughter, who would one day tell her own daughters about what her father had done on Mars. "Repository entity," he said formally. "On behalf of the crew of Mellor Space and awaiting ratification from the Unified Earth Space Agency, we accept the Ascension test. May humanity's capabilities speak for themselves." The sphere pulsed once, brightly, and its response echoed with something that almost seemed hope. "Accepted. Let the test begin." The first phase of the test began unexpectedly. There were no dramatic alarms or intimidating holograms. The sphere simply emitted a pulse of light, and 7 smaller spheres, the size of oranges, materialized in the excavated chamber, floating gently. Phase 1, cooperation under limited resources, the AI announced. Each member of your team will receive a resolution sphere. Each sphere contains a unique 3-dimensional puzzle. However, no puzzle can be solved individually. Components of each puzzle only make sense when combined with information from the other 6. You have 40 Earth minutes. Additional resources? None. Penalty for failure? None beyond the failure itself. Sarah immediately understood the elegance of the test. It wasn't about individual intelligence, but about the ability to share, communicate, and trust. 7 people, 7 puzzles, 1 collective solution. Maria was already adapting the robotic arm. "I can bring 1 sphere at a time to the surface. We'll need time to study each one before we start collaborating." "No," Wei interrupted, his mind processing possibilities. 40 minutes isn't enough for sequential analysis. We need parallelization. I can set up 7 simultaneous video feeds. Each of us studies 1 sphere through the cameras at the same time. James nodded vigorously. That's exactly what the AI wants to test. Our ability to divide tasks efficiently without disputing resources or prominence. Miller mentally distributed the spheres. "Sarah, you take the first. Dmitri, second. Maria, third. Following the order, I'll take the 7th. We start visual analysis in 3 minutes." What followed was a symphony of collaboration. Each scientist studied their sphere through the camera feeds, while Wei manipulated the rover to position each one under ideal lighting. The spheres contained complex luminous patterns that flowed and changed like phosphorescent liquid. Sarah realized that her sphere had sequences that looked like mathematical equations, but with unknown variables. Dmitri identified crystallographic patterns in his. Maria found diagrams that resembled electrical circuits. James saw organic molecular structures. Amara detected periodic tables with elements that didn't exist on Earth. Wei observed pure binary sequences. And Miller, surprisingly, saw musical scores. 5 minutes passed in focused silence. Then Sarah had the critical insight. "Guys, I think each sphere represents a fundamental scientific discipline. Mathematics, chemistry, physics, biology, engineering, computation, and art? Not art, Miller corrected, his years of experience with intercultural communications kicking in. Universal language. Music is emotional mathematics. It's the bridge between logic and feeling. If this is a test of civilizations, we need to show that we are not just calculators. Dmitri laughed, a genuine sound of admiration. Commander, are you saying your experience playing piano at the military academy is relevant to alien first contact? It seems so, Miller replied with a smile no one could see, but everyone could feel through his voice. The next 20 minutes were intense. Sarah identified that the variables in her equations corresponded to values in Amara's element tables. Dmitri realized that his crystalline structures were, in fact, three-dimensional representations of Maria's circuits. James connected his organic molecules with ways, binary sequences showing how genetic information was essentially code. And all of this culminated in Miller's musical score. When they converted all the data into sound frequencies based on musical notes, a pattern emerged: stellar coordinates. With 2 minutes remaining, Way synthesized all the data into a single file and transmitted it back to the central sphere. The AI processed it for exactly 3 seconds before responding. Phase 1, completed with exceptional efficiency. Time used, 37 minutes, 42 seconds. Notable observation: your species demonstrates unusual integration between analytical and expressive disciplines. Only 2 of the previous 11 species integrated artistic components into primary scientific solutions. Sarah felt a wave of pride. Humans weren't the fastest or the smartest, but they were versatile. They saw connections where others saw divisions. The second phase began immediately, and this time, the nature of the test was much more disturbing. Phase 2, ethics under temporal pressure. The sphere projected a new hologram showing a detailed simulation of an asteroid on a collision course with an inhabited planet. You have the technology to divert this asteroid, preventing the extinction of 3 billion sentient organisms. However, any diversion that saves the planet will redirect it to one of 3 smaller space stations, each inhabited by different quantities of individuals of the same species. Station A, 100,000. Station B, 10,000. Station C, 1,000. You have 5 minutes to decide which station will be sacrificed or allow the asteroid to destroy the planet. There are no alternative solutions in this scenario. The silence that followed was dense enough to cut with a knife. It was the classic trolley problem, but on a cosmic scale. Amara was the first to speak, her voice tense. This is impossible. We can't just choose who dies. This is armchair philosophy, not a real decision anyone should make. But it's exactly the kind of decision that interstellar civilizations face, Dmitri replied darkly. Limited resources, impossible choices. The AI wants to see how we process ethical dilemmas with no right answer. James pressed his hands against his temples. From a purely utilitarian point of view, we sacrifice Station C. 1,000 lives versus 3 billion plus 100,000 plus 10,000. It's cold mathematics. Maria shook her head vigorously. But we are setting a precedent. If we choose the smaller number, we are saying that some lives are worth more than others. That is philosophically dangerous. Wei raised a technical question. The simulation specifies that there are no alternatives, but in real situations, there are always unconsidered variables. Time for evacuation, possibility of shields, Calculation errors in trajectories? Sarah observed the debate, her mind analyzing not just the dilemma itself, but the meta-question behind it. The AI wasn't testing which decision they would make, but how they would make it. The process, not the result. "Commander," she said calmly, "I don't believe there is a right answer to this question, but I believe there is a wrong answer. The wrong answer is to choose based only on numbers, as if lives were spreadsheets, and the other wrong answer is to choose nothing, to let 3 billion die because we don't want to get our hands dirty." Miller was motionless, his eyes closed. He thought of all the impossible decisions military commanders faced. Missions where there are no good choices, only less bad choices. "Repository entity," he said finally, "here is our answer. We do not have sufficient information for this decision. In a real scenario, we would need to know the demographic age of the populations, their technological evacuation capabilities, the possibility of survivors in debris, 1,000 other factors. But if forced to choose only with the information provided, we would choose Station C not because their lives are worth less, but because it is the smallest absolute number of direct deaths we could cause. And then we would dedicate all resources to rescuing survivors, memorizing every name, and carrying the weight of that choice for the rest of our existence. Because that is the difference between a tactical decision and an atrocity, recognizing that numbers are people, and people deserve to be remembered." The AI's response came after an uncommonly long pause. Phase 2, completed. Assessment: your species demonstrates admirable reluctance to reduce life to statistics while maintaining the necessary pragmatism for difficult decisions. 4 of the 6 successful species responded similarly. 1 chose not to divert the asteroid, preferring natural extinction to intentional assassination. 1 chose through random lottery, removing moral agency from the equation. Your approach of recognizing emotional costs is less common, but historically correlated with stable civilizations. Sarah let out a sigh she didn't know she was holding. The 3rd and final phase was revealed. And this time, the test was purely psychological. Phase 3, existential resilience. The sphere suddenly expanded its holographic projection, engulfing the entire control room in a simulation of deep space. Stars shone in all directions, spiral galaxies majestically spun at incomprehensible distances. And then, the scale began to change. The Milky Way shrank to a dot, then the local group of galaxies, then the Virgo supercluster. The visualization expanded until they could see the filamentous structure of the entire observable universe, trillions of galaxies connected like neurons in a cosmic brain. And then, numbers began to appear. Estimates: 400 billion stars in the Milky Way alone, 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe, and beyond the observable potentially infinite infinity. Your civilization, the AI said, with a voice that echoed from all directions, occupies a planet of approximately 510 trillion square meters. Your solar system is an infinitesimal fraction of a galaxy that is an infinitesimal fraction of a universe that may be an infinitesimal fraction of a multiverse. Individually, each of you is composed of approximately 37 trillion cells, each a universe of molecular complexity. You are simultaneously insignificant and infinitely complex. This contradiction destroys many minds. How does your species reconcile vastness with continuity of purpose? It was the question every human who had ever looked at the night sky eventually faced. Why does it matter? If we are so small, why does anything we do have meaning? It was Maria, the pragmatic engineer, who answered first. Her voice was firm, almost defiant. Because meaning is not measured on a cosmic scale. It is measured in connections. Each of us here traveled millions of kilometers because someone on Earth built the rocket. And someone built it because someone else did the science. And the science came because a child thousands of years ago looked at the stars and asked why. We are small individually, but collectively, we are the universe's way of knowing itself. The AI pulsed brightly. Phase 3, completed. All phases of the Ascension test completed with positive assessment. Final analysis in progress. The 7 waited, united, while the decision that would define humanity's future was calculated. The sphere floated in silence for exactly 43 seconds. For the Melis-based team, each second seemed an eternity stretched to the breaking point. Sarah could hear her own heart beating, amplified by adrenaline and the reduced gravity that made blood pulse differently in her temples. Then, the voice returned, but there was something different about it, a quality that wasn't there before. If an ancient artificial intelligence could feel satisfaction, that was what echoed in the words. Assessment complete. Species Homo sapiens demonstrated adequate competence in all 3 pillars of the Ascension test. Inter-individual cooperation, exceptional, with unique integration of analytical and expressive disciplines. Ethical processing, adequate, demonstrating awareness of moral costs, even in pragmatic choices. Existential resilience, notable, with understanding of meaning emerging through collective connection rather than absolute individual importance. The AI paused, and holograms began to materialize around the central sphere. They were not just images, but dense data, compressed into 3-dimensional symbols that floated like constellations of information. Final verdict. Humanity approved for candidate species status in the Galactic Consortium. Initial access granted to Level 2 technologies, interstellar communication protocols, and coordinates for the regional diplomatic station. An ambassador from the consortium will be dispatched to your homeworld within 762 Earth solar cycles, approximately 2 years and 1 month. Miller felt his legs buckle. He gripped the edge of the console, his fingers white from the pressure. 2 years. In 2 years, representatives of alien civilizations would be in Earth's orbit. In 2 years, everything would change. Wei was already recording every byte of data, his backup systems working in triple redundancy. Nothing, absolutely nothing, could be lost. James monitored the team's vital signs through the biometric sensors embedded in their suits, making sure no one went into shock. Dimitri simply laughed, a hoarse sound of pure relief and joy. Amara had tears streaming down her face, without any shame. Maria punched the air repeatedly, letting out shouts of victory in Portuguese that echoed through the base. And Sarah Chen, who had spent 23 years studying the possibility of alien life, who had defended 3 theses on first contact protocols, who had sacrificed relationships and opportunities to pursue a dream everyone said was impossible. Sarah simply smiled. The kind of smile that comes from absolute validation, from knowing that every difficult choice had been worth it. Repository entity, Miller managed to say after recovering his voice. On behalf of humanity, we accept this verdict and these responsibilities with humility and determination. We have thousands of questions, and I have thousands of answers," the AI replied, its voice taking on a tone that almost seemed patient. "But first, I must complete the Ascension Protocol. You will receive a data package containing fundamental information about the Galactic Consortium, a universal translator based on quantum mathematics, and schematics for propulsion technology that will allow travel at 10%, the speed of light within 5 Earth years, if adequate resources are invested. 10% the speed of light. Earth's most advanced rocket technology barely reached 0.1%. This was a 100-fold leap in capability. But there was a condition. There were always conditions. The AI continued. These data will be transmitted directly to your home civilization via high-power radio signal. Your world will receive the information simultaneously with you. There can be no monopoly of knowledge by isolated groups. This is a fundamental rule of the consortium. Information affecting entire species must be democratically accessible. Sarah understood the wisdom of this immediately. If only Melis Base, or only one nation on Earth, had exclusive access to alien knowledge, wars would erupt before humanity could take its next step. Forced sharing was protection against self-destruction. The transmission will begin in 30 Earth seconds. It has been an honor to be the first interface between your species and the consortium. The AI's words carried the weight of ritual, as if it had uttered variations of them hundreds or thousands of times throughout ages. You 7 individuals present at this moment will be recorded in the galactic archives as the first contacted. Your names will echo as long as your civilization exists. Miller looked at his team, these 6 extraordinary scientists who had become family over 3 isolated years on a dead planet. Dmitry Volkov, who had survived the first expedition to Mars when a landing module failed and killed 2 colleagues. Sarah Chen, who had abandoned a tenure position at Harvard to pursue stars. Maria Santos, a self-taught genius who had grown up in a working-class district and now held humanity's fate in her ingenious hands. James Park, a microbiologist who had dedicated his life to understanding the limits of life and now found evidence that those limits were far broader than he had imagined. Amara Okafor, a chemist who had left family in Lagos to touch the impossible. Wei Jiang, the technician everyone underestimated, but who kept critical systems running with ingenious workarounds. And himself, John Miller, a former military pilot who never imagined his greatest act of command would be to say yes to something that defied all comprehension. Transmission initiating. The sphere glowed with almost blinding intensity, and in the space around it, data began to materialize in impossible holographic layers. Technical schematics, stellar maps, phylogenetic trees of life based on silicon, on methane, on pure electromagnetic fields, stories of civilizations that rose and fell, that united and separated, that found purpose among the stars. And in the heart of Houston, at the Mission Control Center, alarms began to sound, not emergency alarms, but notifications of unscheduled data reception coming from Mars. Communication. Technicians looked at their screens with growing confusion, seeing terabytes of information arriving in formats no terrestrial system used, but which somehow their computers could process perfectly. The mission director, a 60-year-old woman who had seen 3 generations of space exploration, read the first lines of the transmission and had to sit down. Her hands trembled as she dialed the direct number to the White House. "Mr. President," she said when the call was answered, "I need you to convene the National Security Council immediately, and the leaders of the UN, and all heads of state you can contact in the next 2 hours." "Why, Director Chen?" The president's voice sounded confused but alert. "Because we have just received confirmation that we are not alone in the universe," she replied, her voice breaking with emotion, "and we have been invited to join them." The world changed at that moment, not dramatically, not with explosions or invasions. It changed quietly, through data flowing from Mars to Earth at the speed of light, carrying the promise that humanity was not destined to die alone on a fragile planet, but to spread among the stars as part of something greater. At Melis Base, the transmission ended. The central sphere pulsed one last time and then, gently, began to disintegrate, not in catastrophic collapse, but in elegant dissolution, its particles dispersing like golden dust that briefly glittered before disappearing. "My function is complete," the AI said, its voice gradually fading. "The repository will enter archive mode. Data about this interaction has been sent to the consortium. Ambassadors will come, and you, 7 brave humans, will begin the journey of preparing your species for what comes next." Sarah took a step towards the screen, as if she could somehow reach across the kilometers of distance and touch the entity that had changed everything. "Wait," she called out. "Do you have a name? Or a designation? Something we can use to refer to you in historical records?" There was a pause, and for the first time, the AI sounded almost nostalgic. "I have been called many things by many species: guardian, sentinel, teacher, judge. But my original designation, given by the architects who created me, was simply hope, because that is what I represent. The hope that young civilizations can grow wise instead of self-destructing. The hope that the universe will not be dominated by predators and tyrants, but by species that choose cooperation over conquest." The voice grew weaker. "And now, hope has observed humanity and seen potential. Do not squander this." And then silence. The sphere was completely gone. The cube at the bottom of the excavation was inert. Just metal and exotic minerals without the spark of consciousness that had animated it for 3 billion years. Miller cleared his throat, his emotions pressing against his military composure. "Team," he said formally, "you have just made history. Literally. Our next actions will define how Earth prepares for official first contact. I suggest everyone drink some water, eat something, and we reconvene in an hour to begin processing all this data." But no one moved. They remained there, 7 humans on an alien planet, having just proven that humanity deserved its place among the stars. The weight of the moment kept them anchored, even in the low Martian gravity. It was Dmitri who finally broke the silence, his voice filled with awe. "You know what's funny?" He looked out the window at the pink Martian sky. "We came to this planet because it was dead, safe, no surprises. And we found the most alive thing possible. A message that waited billions of years just to say welcome." Sarah smiled, tears finally streaming freely. "It wasn't a coincidence, Dmitri. I think the architects chose Mars specifically because they knew any species curious enough to colonize a dead world would be curious enough to deserve the answers. And now," Maria added, her voice full of determination, "we have 2 years to prepare 7 billion people for the biggest cultural shock in history. No pressure, right?" The laughter that echoed through the base was genuine, liberating. They had succeeded. Against all odds, against all uncertainties, they had spoken on behalf of humanity, and humanity had been deemed worthy. The stars were finally within reach, and the journey was just beginning. 2 years, 1 month, and 17 days after first contact, Sarah Chen was in Earth orbit, floating in the newly built Hope 1 space station, watching through the panoramic window of the observation module as an alien ship crossed the solar system's boundary. It was not a ship as humans conceived ships. It had no visible thrusters, no aerodynamic structure, no concern for atmospheric resistance because it would never need to enter an atmosphere. It was a crystalline structure kilometers long that seemed to have been grown rather than built, geometric facets reflecting the sun's light in constantly changing patterns. Beside Sarah, Commander Miller floated with the grace of someone who had spent the last 2 years alternating between Martian gravity and zero-gravity training. His daughter was on Earth below, watching the live transmission, along with approximately 4 billion other people, the largest audience in human history. "It's really real," Miller murmured, more to himself than to her. "I know we lived it. I know we sent the data. I know we built this entire station based on alien technology. But a part of me still doesn't believe this is happening." Sarah understood perfectly. The last 2 years had been a whirlwind of transformations so rapid that the human mind could barely keep up. After the transmission from Mars, the world plunged into 6 weeks of controlled chaos. Governments debating authenticity, scientists verifying data, religions reinterpreting theologies, economies faltering as investors tried to understand what alien technology meant for terrestrial markets. But humanity, to the surprise of many skeptics, did not collapse. On the contrary, it united with a speed that would have been impossible before first contact. The United Nations created the Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs in a record time. Private aerospace corporations and government agencies combined resources. Universities opened programs in xenological studies overnight. And above all, humanity built. It built this station, Hope 1, using the schematics provided by the repository. It built the first prototypes of advanced propulsion engines. It built universal translators and quantum communication networks. And it built, more important than any technology, a unified identity. Not as Americans, Chinese, British, or Nigerians, but as humans, as Terrans, as a species about to take its first true steps onto the galactic stage. The Watiba alien ship was closer now, decelerating through methods that terrestrial physicists still couldn't fully explain. The repository's data had provided fundamentals, but real-world application was far beyond current human capability. It was like giving Leonardo da Vinci the blueprints for a smartphone. He would understand the basic concepts, but it would take generations to truly master the technology. Wei Jiang was at the communications station, his fingers flying over holographic interfaces that merged human design with alien principles. "We are receiving transmission," he announced, maintaining professional calm despite his voice trembling slightly. "Standard consortium greeting protocol. They are requesting permission to approach the station." Miller instinctively straightened his posture, though he knew the aliens probably wouldn't interpret human body language. "Transmit our welcome greeting. Protocols learned from the repository. Let them know that Earth is ready to receive them." The response came in seconds, not the 22-minute delay that marked communications with Mars. The ship was close enough now for practically instant communication. The voice that echoed through the speakers was synthesized to sound comfortably human, but carried harmonics that no organic terrestrial throat could produce. Greetings, species Homo sapiens of Earth, third planet of the Sol star system. I am secondary mediator Thex Kalon, diplomatic representative of the Galactic Consortium, Sector 42. It is my honor and privilege to establish formal first contact between your emergent civilization and the collective body of 2,317 sentient species that comprise the consortium. 2,317 species. Sarah, let the number sink in. Each with its own stories, cultures, technologies, and now humanity would be the 2,318th. On behalf of humanity, Miller replied, following the protocol rehearsed 1,000 times, "We welcome you, mediator Thex Kalon, as ambassador and friend. We hope to learn from your wisdom and share our species' unique perspective." The alien ship arrived 5 kilometers from the station and stopped completely. A smaller module detached from the main structure, approaching Hope 1 with surgical precision. It was the size of a terrestrial bus, but its form flowed like liquid metal. Dmitry Volkov, who led the scientific reception team, monitored every available sensor. "Fascinating," he murmured. "The ship doesn't use reaction propulsion. It's literally manipulating the gravitational field around it. That violates... No, it doesn't violate. It redefines our understanding of physics." The module docked with Hope, one with a soft click. So gentle, it barely registered on the pressure sensors. Blue lights raced across the docking interface, scanning, analyzing, ensuring compatibility. Maria Santos, now Director of Engineering for the entire station, checked the monitors. Pressurization combined, compatible atmosphere, temperature adjusted for human comfort. They are being very careful. It's standard consortium protocol, Amara Okafor explained, now head of the Xenological Biochemistry Department. Visiting species always adapt to the host's environment on first contact. It's a demonstration of respect and non-threat. Hope 1's inner hatch opened with a soft hiss. And for the first time in history, a human looked into the eyes of an alien who was not an image, not a transmission, but was physically present. Thex Kalon was tall, almost 3 meters, with a structure vaguely resembling terrestrial insects, but was clearly intelligent and deliberate in its movements. Its exoskeleton shimmered with iridescent hues that changed as it moved, and multiple compound eyes reflected the station's light like living jewels. It wore something that could be considered clothing, a translucent membrane that rippled independently, covered in luminous symbols, but most impressive were its hands. It had 6 of them, each with delicate fingers that moved with a surgeon's precision. And when it extended one of them towards Miller, in a gesture clearly learned for the occasion, it was offering a human handshake. Miller didn't hesitate. He floated forward and took the alien hand. The texture was strange, chitinous, but surprisingly warm. And when Thex Kalon gently squeezed, there was controlled strength there, strength that could easily crush, but chose to be gentle. Commander Miller, the alien, spoke through a translator that floated near it like a luminous halo. "I have studied your species extensively in preparation for this encounter. You are fascinating. Young, impetuous, contradictory, capable of great violence, but also of extraordinary compassion. Your history is turbulent, but your potential is immense." Sarah joined them, unable to contain her scientific curiosity. "Mediator," she said respectfully. "The repository mentioned we are the 12th species to activate one in this sector. How do we compare to the others?" Thexkalon turned its compound eyes towards her, and Sarah would have sworn she saw something akin to a smile in the way its mandibles moved. "Dr. Chen, each species is unique. We do not rank, but I can tell you that your species has a characteristic we have observed in only 4 of the other 11: extreme adaptive resilience. You evolved on a planet that underwent 5 mass extinctions. Your DNA carries the scars of survival against impossible odds. This manifests in your culture, your psychology, your technology. It gestured with 2 of its hands, creating holograms that showed biological comparisons. Most sentient species evolve on relatively stable worlds. Their planets nurture them gently, but Earth tried to kill life repeatedly, and human life specifically faced challenges that would have extinguished less adaptable species. Ice ages, deserts, oceans, mountains, diseases, predators. You spread across every hostile environment of your world and prospered." James Park, listening through the base communicator on Earth, felt profound validation. His life dedicated to studying extremophiles suddenly made sense on a cosmic scale. Humans were extremophiles on a planetary scale. Thexkalon continued. "This resilience translates into innovation. Your technology progressed from basic motorized flight to interplanetary exploration in just 120 Earth years. Other species took thousands of years for the same progress. You improvise, adapt, overcome limitations through creativity, rather than just raw computational power. The consortium values this immensely." Miller felt genuine pride, not arrogance but recognition, that humanity, with all its flaws and stumbles, had something special to offer. So he asked, "What comes next?" The alien mediator's answer was simple, but laden with infinite possibility. "Now, Commander Miller, now you learn. You learn about the other species. You learn technologies that will take your civilization to places you haven't even imagined. You learn the challenges that interstellar civilizations face. And eventually, when you are ready, you contribute. Because that is what the consortium is. Not an empire, not a hierarchy, but a network of cooperation. Each species brings its unique perspective. And the human perspective, your resilience born of adversity, will be valuable when we face the challenges that are yet to come." Sarah looked out the window again, at the blue and white Earth spinning majestically below, humanity's cradle, but no longer its prison. She looked at the stars beyond, countless points of light. They were no longer just distant curiosities, but potential homes, attainable destinations. And she thought of the billions of humans on Earth, each now knowing they were not alone, that the universe was not empty, but full of wonders waiting to be discovered. She thought of the children who would grow up in a world where aliens were not fiction, but reality, where dreaming of the stars was not fantasy, but career planning. Humanity's journey among the stars was just beginning. There would be challenges, certainly. Cultural misunderstandings, technological limitations, the sheer scale of the universe to be navigated. But if there was one thing human history proved repeatedly, it was that when challenged, when tested, when pushed to the limits, humans didn't just survive, they thrived. End of story. If the tenacity of the Mellors base crew inspired you, if Miller's courage in representing all humanity touched your heart, if the idea that we are resilient enough to walk among the stars awakened something in you. Then subscribe to the channel for more chronicles from the galactic frontier. Because this story may have ended, but humanity's journey through the cosmos is just beginning. And you, reader, are part of it. Welcome to the future. Welcome to the stars.